A family unit operates as an interconnected ecosystem. In a functional environment, the roles assigned to each member are fluid. They change over time as children mature, allowing individuals to adapt to new circumstances. Because these healthy systems are adaptable, they retain their structural integrity. If an individual member moves out, alters their beliefs, or establishes an independent identity, the overarching community survives. The clinical reality of a narcissistic household operates under entirely different mechanics. Bowen family systems theory describes this structure as an undifferentiated collective ego mass, an environment where individual boundaries dissolve entirely into a single enmeshed unit. Look at this comparison. A healthy family is represented by distinct fluid circles. Conversely, the dysfunctional family operates as locked metal gears. Notice the massive central gear. Peripheral gears cannot spin independently. Their movement is dictated entirely by that single central parent. Narcissistic homes function as rigid machines, optimized to regulate the core parent's fragile self-esteem at the expense of everyone else. For a machine of this density to continue running smoothly, the moving parts must remain completely and utterly static. This requires actively halting the natural psychological development of the children. When a child sets a boundary, forms an outside relationship, or develops an independent thought, the system registers a malfunction. Autonomy poses an existential threat to the family's stability. To avoid throwing a wrench into the established order, family members must learn to submerge their true personalities. The price of admission for a child's basic psychological survival within this environment is the complete forfeiture of their authentic self. This forfeiture is achieved through a process called malignant normalcy. The household normalizes manipulation, emotional neglect, and abuse, hardwiring the child to accept these conditions as standard operating procedure. Like a black hole, the narcissistic parent's intense gravity bends incoming truths. Objective realities and personal boundaries are bent, distorted, and swallowed to fit the parent's preferred narrative. This epistemological collapse induces traumatic cognitive dissonance. The child learns to doubt their own senses and memory, entirely outsourcing their reality testing apparatus to the parent. The primary mechanism used to enforce this behavioral control was identified by psychologist Carl Rogers as conditional positive regard. Under this paradigm, love, approval, and warmth are not guaranteed. They are communicated exclusively when the child meets strict performance or emotional standards, and they are instantly withdrawn the moment the child falls short. Denied intrinsic self-worth, the child constructs a highly functional, adapted self, replacing their own internal reality with the parent's pathology. The specific trajectory of this relational trauma changes based on the diagnostic subtype of the parent. We begin with the first vector, grandiose narcissism. This subtype operates via a logic tree flowing downward into authoritarian parenting. Grandiose parents utilize rigid top-down control and high demands, paired with near-zero emotional responsiveness. They routinely weaponize their children's academic or social achievements. The child is treated as a show pony, utilized primarily to bolster the parent's own social status. This produces a specific clinical output: a child forced into emotional detachment, entitlement, and a severe form of hyper-independence. The second diagnostic vector is vulnerable narcissism. Here, the structure flows into permissive and overprotective parenting, characterized by suffocating enmeshment. The vulnerable parent is defined by hypersensitivity and chronic self-doubt. They actively blur the boundaries between parent and child to establish guilt-based control. These parents deploy guilt, passive aggression, and emotional incest to manipulate the child, essentially forcing the child to manage the parent's internal chaos. The result is a child paralyzed by their own hypersensitivity, battling deep dependency and low self-esteem. Regardless of which divergent pathway the family takes, both systemic vectors guarantee the development of insecure, disorganized attachment patterns in adulthood. To ensure these systems operate without interruption, the family relies on specific structural hardware. Children are assigned inescapable codependent roles to make up the whole of the family unit. This table outlines the ecosystem requirements. Every child is forced into a codependent role serving the parent, exacting a severe cost on the child's internal reality. Observe the golden child. Their function is validating the parent by acting as a repository for grandiosity. The internal cost to this child is a crushing perfectionism. They live in perpetual fear of failure, terrified of losing the parent's conditional love. Next is the scapegoat. This child acts as the defiant truth teller, which makes them the mandatory repository for the parent's projected shame. By absorbing all the blame for the household's dysfunction, the scapegoat provides the ultimate distraction, maintaining the system's illusion of perfection. Then there is the enabler, or caretaker. Their entire function is to frantically protect the parent from experiencing the consequences of their own actions. This role forces parentification. The enabler loses their childhood because their time and energy are completely consumed by managing the adult's dysregulation. Because these roles operate as load-bearing structural gears, the system is inherently fragile. If one individual drops their assigned role, it creates an irreparable hole that threatens to collapse the entire machine. When this happens, the system deploys flying monkeys. This is a coordinated response where other family members are used to coerce, guilt, or force the differentiating individual back into strict compliance. These assigned roles function as rigid survival mechanisms, engineered to absorb the parent's pathology so the system can remain standing. Surviving this architecture leaves deep clinical imprints. Adult children frequently struggle with chronic self-doubt, deeply ingrained people-pleasing, and an inability to trust their own decision-making processes. This leads to repetition compulsion. Without intervention, adults will unconsciously seek out or recreate these exact, rigid, malignant systems in their professional workplaces or intimate marriages. This childhood trauma persists as an active operating code, quietly dictating the adult's present reality. Escaping this system requires a clinical protocol known as self-differentiation and demeshment. By observing rather than absorbing, the individual builds the psychological distance required to see the family's malignant normalcy without internalizing its cognitive dissonance. As the individual physically and emotionally withdraws their gear from the machine, the narcissistic system breaks down. The jagged metal survival mechanisms dissolve, revealing a fluid, adaptable boundary. To sustain this separation, the individual must establish unconditional self-regard. This internal support replaces the external validation that the narcissist previously withheld. Dismantling these internalized conditions of worth facilitates the transition from a codependent gear back into an autonomous, emotionally secure individual.